Hi everyone, welcome to FilmDirt. I've just rewatched possibly one of the nuttiest films ever released, in my opinion. It's Face Off, starring Nicolas Cage and John Travolta. And during the course of the film, they switch faces, so they kind of play each other. This film is just nuts. If you can just imagine let's say, a typical Nicolas Cage movie with a story that's just out there, you cannot explain to someone else with a straight face. This is possibly it. As well as being like I said, a nutty, almost bizarre film. It's a great action movie in its own right and a great movie overall. It's so bizarre, it works. And it just keeps you captivated. Maybe because it's so bizarre. And everything just ties together. Now, I hope you've all already seen this film before you clicked on this video. I did mark it as a spoiler review. In fact, all my reviews are spoiler reviews because I like to talk freely about what I saw. Like I'm talking to a friend, openly discussing the storyline. It's not easy to tiptoe around the spoilers. You can only get what you want to say out there. I'm probably losing viewers that way that don't want spoilers, but it's the only way I can talk about the film. It's very difficult otherwise. Okay, so we all know the story. A huge criminal is captured, and to get rid of the entire gang, you have to go undercover as the criminal by switching faces. As simple as that. But everything else that goes with it, like dealing with the various traumas, and the villain ends up acquiring the face of the cop too. Of course he does. And that's what makes the movie. We've got two great actors here, two of my favourites, Nicolas Cage and John Travolta. I've loved these two in previous films and films since, but out of the two, I've always found this film a typical Nicolas Cage film. He does a lot of films like this, and he doesn't care about awards or Shakespearean stories. This is the film that people want to go and see, where it's just all over the place and in your face, and it's just so entertaining. And later in the film, when they're almost mimicking each other, John Travolta playing Nicolas Cage, I think he did a fantastic job. We get the little, as many nuances as we can get into the performance. And Nicolas Cage does act like John Travolta. I know Travolta kind of stoops when he walks. I don't know if it's just me seeing that, but Nick Cage did that as well. Maybe too extreme, but it just sells the role a lot better. And some of Cage's acting here is just really fantastic. I'm talking in particular about the scene where he's sitting with his crew, and at this point in the film he's supposed to be Sean Archer playing Castor. And the way he conveys the difficulty he's having playing the role when I think he has to give up his password for his home security system or something like that, isn't it? Isn't it a password which is his dead son's birthday date? And the way that he conveys that to the screen is just brilliant when they're all laughing. And I think it's got something to do with the brilliant soundtrack as well. But the whole thing plays out just brilliantly. Now, John Travolta's role after the face switch when he infiltrates the FBI, that's not on the same level, but it's really good as well. It's really good work by John Travolta. I just think the most interesting role was definitely Nicolas Cage's, as both Sean Archer and Castor. It's almost confusing to explain, isn't it? So let's touch on the face switch scene. When they're lying in a coma, I believe they're dummies of the actors lying on the trolleys, and they do look real to a point. They're not quite there, but they still look good. And I'm assuming they're all practical effects when they're cutting into the skin and they're lifting off the faces and then putting one of them in a jar or whatever that is. It's just completely hilarious. And they show just enough, of a horror, body horror moment, but not quite overstepping the mark to make it a real grotesque type horror. But what really is grotesque is not this part of the scene. It's the next scene where, for some reason, Castor Troy wakes up from his coma and finds out he's got no face because it's already been removed. And it's just the thought of this guy taking off the bandages and then realising, something's wrong here with his face. So he has to call members of his other gang to then go and find the surgeon, to bring the surgeon back at gunpoint, and then reattach the only face that's left, which is John Travolta's in the jar. And then the way the rest of the movie plays out is just so out there and unbelievable. There's a lot of this film which really is too much to believe is ever possible. And I'm not just talking physically possible with the face switch, but infiltrating each other's domains. You've got the villain infiltrating the FBI and his home life with his wife and daughter, and that's definitely not what Sean Archer wanted, realising that while he's undercover in prison with the villain's gang, he's got the villain having fun with his wife. And that part of the story is also brilliantly portrayed by both actors. And that brings me on to the film's director, John Woo, who was a little bit of a name during the late 90s. I remember he was very famous with a few of his Hong Kong movies. One of them was Hard Boiled, wasn't it? Which is just a superb film. I've seen it a while ago. I'll have to revisit and do a review for this channel because that is a great film. With Chow Yun-fat, I recall. And there was another film as well which just escaped me now, but he was then getting offers from Hollywood studios. I don't know if this was the first Western film he did, but he did another one which wasn't as good called Wind Talkers. And Broken Arrow is the other one I'm thinking of. I really need to revisit that because I remember I didn't really get it the first time. But to be frank, this is the one. Face Off is the one that really made him in the eyes of Western audiences. He introduces quite a few tropes here. Tropes, they're called like signature little pieces he puts into more than one film, which is a trademark. Like the gunplay or holding two guns, isn't it? And also he uses a lot of doves flying through the scene and slow-mo as well. And it just all works. I quite like slow-mo used creatively in movies because it kind of brings more emotion to the scene. And mixed with a great soundtrack, which this film does have. I mean, the soundtrack alone is really good, rousing, typical Hollywood fare. But it just really fits the movie in an almost Hans Zimmer type feel. I mean, you know what I'm getting at. And if I were to pick any negatives with the film, I mean, really, you can't say the story itself is a negative because it's so unbelievable. I mean, that's what's so great about this film. The only negative I can think of really is the third act, the action scene and the boat chase. I think they used stunt doubles a little bit too clearly. You can see it's not John Travolta or Nicolas Cage in certain sequences. I guess nowadays you'd have visual effects to do a face replacement to the stunt guys so it does look like the actors. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But then again, that's the beauty of this film, isn't it? Some people want less visual effects as possible because they just want the natural creativeness that was achieved on the set, on the day, in the camera. That's where filmmakers earn their money, don't they? And a lot of creativity has to be achieved on set, especially with older films. And I'm not just talking about before visual effects, before computer imagery. Sometimes models and mannequins and blood effects don't really look that real. It depends on the budget of the movie, I guess, whether they can achieve convincing effects. But whether it's practical, achieved in camera with models and makeup, or whether it's achieved afterwards in post with computer imagery, really it's just all about telling the story as convincingly as possible to the screen. And I don't mind some visual effects that are done right, as a lot are very convincing nowadays. I think we're almost there. But for a film made in the 90s, you can excuse a few little negatives and just appreciate what we got on screen. And again, it really is a fantastic movie, one of my very favourites. It's one of those that you tell your friends to watch, and if they say they haven't seen it, you just go into a long explanation to force them to watch it, because it really is just one of those films you have to see, isn't it? Just because it's so bizarre. And I don't recall ever seeing a film like it. I hope it isn't remade. I've heard a few little stories that they're thinking of remaking it or doing something similar. It doesn't really need to be remade. I think we got what we got. And for 90s technology, it was supposed to be a futuristic surgery procedure, wasn't it? And of course, we can just switch our brains off and just enjoy the ride, can't we? So that's my take on Face Off. Let's give it 5 stars, and completely deserved 5 stars too. And before I sign out, let me just leave you with a little bit about myself, because this is my new solo channel. Again, I also review new movies, and I'm not sponsored by any studio, and nor do I get any free tickets to favourably give a false review. All my views are definitely my own and unbiased. Thanks again for joining me to chat about this great movie. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I'll speak to you again for another review soon. All the best, take care.